Good afternoon, and what a pleasure it is to kick off the first panel at NEN Zagreb 2022. And what a beautiful room it is that we're kicking off in. We're going to be talking about co-production. We're going to try to draw out from our conversation just a couple of things. Firstly, what is it? Why are we doing it? What difference does it make around, as we're talking, the high and low production companies? What values or value does co-production or co-productions bring? And maybe, if we're really lucky, we'll work out something actionable about how we can do things a little bit better in the future. So I'm Jonathan Broughton. I'm head of strategy at the EBU. I'm very excited to be here, not just because co-production is in general a fascinating topic, but also one of increasing strategic importance to the EBU, which we're engaging in wider and more deeply. Increasingly, we find that for many of our members, the broadcasters, that in order to compete on an international and even, in some cases, on a national footing, co-productions are fast becoming an essential tool in their arsenals. So we operate a range of informational and functional forums and resources in this space. So if you're working with broadcasters or you want to explore this space a little bit more, do grab me, get in touch, or otherwise engage with us to learn more. And that's the end of my plug. I'm joined by a broad and star-studded panel today. Let me very briefly introduce them. So to my left, yes, we are in order, well done. We have Moritz, who's the Managing Director and Executive Producer of Windlight Productions, named among Variety's top 10 global creatives to watch, and has won accolades like the Rummy Award for Best Production TV Fiction for Freud, and the Magnolia Award for Best Foreign TV Film for Das Boot. Oh, it's not in order. Emmanuel. Emmanuel is the Deputy Acquisitions Director for Mediawan, and also sports quite a dynamic past, having worked for 15 years at M6 Group as a buyer, and in 2011 became a producer. If that's right, perfect. First within the Newen Group and then in an independent capacity. You've been the Director of Acquisitions for Lagardère.
Yes.
Studio Distributions since 2018 and is now working for Mediawan Rights, which is the distribution arm of the group. Post-production company in France.
Yes.
In France.
Totally.
Perfect. I have Anne Kica, who is a producer from a local producer from Croatia, who founded her first production company, Kinorama, in 2003 with two partners. And Kica's filmography includes 30 feature films and a couple of high-end TV series, which is an important distinction we'll be talking about in a moment. She's a member of EFA, ACE, and EVE. In 2019, you were awarded with the Euro-Images co-production award at the EFA ceremony in Berlin, and also teaches at the Academy of Dramatic Art in Zagreb. So, busy. Dana Stern. Dana Stern almost needs no introduction, is an international TV veteran. Having headed Yes Studios, you're now a consultant, a content executive, a producer, and everything in between, and even have been engaging with us at the EBU in a small capacity as well. Why don't I kick off with a question to each of you? But of course, if it's a very interesting question, do feel free to engage. Moritz, you're on my left, so you get the first question. Simple one. When we spoke earlier, we talked a little bit about value. I love the question value because it has so many open-ended sort of answers to it. So why don't we start there? Let's start with the why of the co-production, and let's talk a little bit about why you get involved in co-productions, and try and bear in mind that value that we talked about on the phone.
Well, I think that, you know, when we get approached, and I look at it from that perspective, because when we approach someone, I know why I do it, but if I do get approached by a production entity or a co-producer who wants to co-produce with me, then first of all, I obviously look at what he's pitching, the series, the material, the creative behind it. If I like it, then the second question is, what value do I bring to the project? And that's, I think, what you're referring to, is it's the question of what's the value added benefit of it being a co-production with us at Windlight Pictures, with me specifically. And I think that value addition needs to be big enough for us to engage in a production and actually get involved, because otherwise, why do it, right? If we are only there to do deficit funding or to get tax credits, then I feel that it's not a project that I want to get involved in. Why? Because I think that there needs to be more than that in order to make it a real co-production, and that is, I want to be able to be involved in the creative and form and shape it so that it's a true co-production, two companies coming together, creating one creative piece of fiction, and then there should be a benefit that is financial one way or the other, because obviously I want to get a margin if I get involved. So those two things need to come together, and there needs to be value added. Otherwise, why do it?
So it's a balance. It's a balance of the two.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that without the creative, we wouldn't get involved. I think that's the first and foremost thing. And then, if we can be a conduit to getting to a local broadcaster, then wonderful. Then come to us and do it. If we are a conduit to a streamer, because we are just the bigger entity of the two, then I'm already not so sure whether we are the right people to do it, because then we are just a sell-through in a way, and that's not, a co-production per se. That's more a financial reason to come together. And while I'm sure that my shareholders would say, wherever you can make a margin, you should do it, I feel that we stretch our capacity if we just do everything that we can in that way.
I'm going to follow up with Dana, I think. When we spoke, we spoke a little bit about, because you've been involved sort of in a fairly direct way on exactly this side of the business in sort of directly setting up some of these deals, and you have your own sort of advisory capacity in this. I feel, my personal opinion, that you perhaps fall a little bit towards the finance first rather than the creative first opinion of the co-production. I'd love to hear your opinions.
Well, I think what Moritz said is ideal, right? But we're not in an ideal market, and certainly not in an ideal industry. It's ever changing. Just last week we saw a huge number of people lose their job in two studios, and that's something that we've been seeing, throughout the last 3 years, and certainly I'd say in the last 6 months. There's consolidation. There are less opportunities to sell. There are less services. So I think it's just the necessary reality of the market right now is that everybody kind of pulls their resources together. So while for a reason of creativity and always, we want to think that's kind of the holy grail, and we all do this for the art, this is also a business. And the reality is that, we need to work together. And whatever somebody can bring to the table, I say take it.
Ankita, you had some fascinating perspectives when we spoke on the phone. I think whenever, certainly in my role as a strategist, I think one of the most interesting and kind of fast way you can learn about your own industry is if you take somebody who works in something similar and you just kind of expose them to it. And the reaction is, why? Why is it like this? Why do these things work? Why do these things not work? And that was sort of what I got a little bit when we were talking. So the majority of your co-productions come from a film perspective, and I won't spoil your answer. But with the kind of perspective of having a perhaps more mature model of sort of financing and collaboration, how do you sort of find the sort of television co-production operation?
Yeah, actually, I do have vast experience in co-producing feature films. I only co-produced one TV series recently, last year. It was a successful collaboration. But I think what is very interesting is to look into the models. They are pre-existing. in feature film industry and maybe transfer some of these models to the co-producing TV shows. And because I think that the goals are just the same. We all want to have a wider market, we all want to have more money, and we all want to meet new talents. We want to expand this network of talents. So co-producing is sort of very natural thing to do in Europe, having in mind that most of the countries are tiny, and there are also some goals that are not connected with the needs of the producer or the project, which are mainly European goals, to keep the diversity by cherishing each and every culture and the language, but also to be united as Europe. This is why I think in the film field, the things that we have already as a framework, like a European Convention on Co-production, something like this is a very useful tool because it puts down the rules. What is a co-production? What is a financial co-production? What is an artistic one? Who has which rights? Why do we co-produce? So many answers are actually in one legal document that was signed by all European countries, no matter EU or not. And this is something that we use on a daily basis when we co-produce for feature films. And I would like to have a tool like this in a TV production as well. It would be of tremendous help, I think.
Makes perfect sense.
So maybe it's on your company to do it. EBU, I mean, I don't see another one who can be more suitable.
It's going to be my next question. Who should be doing that? That's awkward
You
silence.
should, because you are strategist, so I think it goes without saying.
It's a really interesting proposition. So, you know, jokes aside, it is something that is becoming increasingly important. So, you know, watch this space. As a follow-up, you know, one of the big challenges is that it's a very dynamic space. There's a lot of very different levels of a co-production. So, opinions of the panel. Why doesn't this already exist? Is it the fragmentation of the co-production market? Is it just that it's not been needed before and now we need it, or is it always kind of been a sort of a victim of the sort of very dynamic nature of the TV business? Any opinions?
Well, I think that part of it is because the question of co-production and what is a co-production is ever changing. And I think that when you look at, you know, most of the co-productions that were happening in the past were there because if you didn't do a co-production, you wouldn't be able to access tax credits from a local production country that you wanted to shoot in. So co-productions were done because you needed them in order to get the funding. And then slowly but steadily, the countries decided that as these were not real co-productions, meaning there was no share in back-end, there was no share in creative or nothing or rights or any of that, because the bigger production country that came to the low-cost production country didn't go there in order to share their rights with the local producer. They went there to find a service production company that then did a co-production, in inverted commas, with them. So if that is the reason why you're going somewhere, why should you have a regulation where you need to really have a co-production? Because all the risk is with the main producer and not with the co-producer, and the co-producer doesn't want the risk, so why should they get a benefit of, you know, rights and so on and so forth? Those things changed, right? And one after the other, they stopped having to have co-productions. But then there are other, you know, like European Media Board. If you want that money, you still have to do a co-production. So everything changes all the time, and the rules and regulations change. There are rules and regulations that you can look at, but they are different from country to country, and therefore, I think what co-production is defined differently.
And what is interesting is if we're talking about co-production and media, for example, you can have co-production, of course, but you can also just have a pre-buy. And then if you have just a pre-buy, 1 or 2 or 3 pre-buy, then you can have your tax credits and your media and everything. So if we need to define what is a real co-production. And we haven't said yet the key word, which is organic. And when you are talking a co-production between different countries or different production company, you always say, is it an organic production? Why do you want to do this co-production? When you find a body in the border of Norway and Sweden, it's organic, because it's normal that you have 2 cops. But besides this very obvious organic example, it's rare to have a true organic co-production, true organic project. So when we find one, we will find a solution to finance it. But otherwise, it will be pre-sales, co-financement, servicing. There is many new worlds. It's not exactly co-production.
Well, there's also the new world of quotas, which obviously will create more co-productions. Because the countries that have the quotas for the streamers are not necessarily the countries where the streamers want to produce.
Exactly.
So in order to get the stamp of this is a whatever country, I'm not taking a country now, but I want the stamp of a specific country, and because
because he has to.
You have to.
Yes.
Then you might find a way of making it as a co-production and getting the stamp, but still doing a project that reaches a wider audience or fulfills a greater need.
Makes a lot of sense. Emmanuel, I haven't asked you your opening question. We spoke a lot about actually definitions. This seems to be a sort of favorite topic here. Our panel is about low and high country co-productions, and that led to a quite dynamic conversation around what that meant. What does high and low mean? So we talked about that in terms of demand, in terms of the size of the country, in terms of the sort of size of the cash available. But for you, if you're thinking about, let's say, a sort of opportunity more than anything else, how would you sort of think about that in terms of if somebody said a high volume production or a high opportunity production company? What thoughts occur to you?
Well, it's because I am a distributor now, so my perspective is a bit different. Is I try to be a matchmaker between different production company or different territory. And so talking about big country or little country, I don't know exactly how to define them, because we can say that England is a big country, is a big production country, but a very low co-production country, because they don't want to do some co-productions. I love them, but they don't want it. Well, they want our money, but they don't want our artistic input. Germany is quite the same. France is really the same. It's a big country, but we are not doing a lot of co-production. So I think the real energy will come from the little country. Again, I don't know if little is a good word, but from the little country, we will need this kind of co-production. We will need not only new money, because they can deal it within their own territory, but they will need more international value, more being more seen. So because of this country, we can do more co-production. So my job is really to see, okay, I have a project from Italy, why not? And so they want to shoot, or they want a co-production with one country, so let's do the match between 2 producers. But and big country, it's a financial point of view. The most important thing is the project itself, and the script, and the pitch, and the concept. After, we can just finance. It's just, okay, we can do a pre-sale, or pre-buy, or whatever.
Okay, it's not just about the money on the table.
I mean, I think that, to your point, Dana, I think that the question of what is a co-production and whether it has to do with the concept or not is the question of, does a co-production mean the project itself needs to have elements from both countries, yes or no? If it does have to have elements from both countries, then I think you're completely right. Then first the creative has to work, because otherwise we go back to Europe putting shit that we don't want to do anymore. If it doesn't have to have that, if it's a co-production for other reasons, meaning quality, for instance, of talent that can be accessed in one country that can't be accessed in another country, contacts of one producer that the producer of the smaller country, and I'm difficult to use that word, but I mean,
I don't like it.
Germany and so on are bigger countries. I mean, let's just use size of audience that is living in the country, then I think it's not negative to talk about smaller and bigger ones. Then that's completely fair enough. And then still the question of the creative, in my opinion at least, comes to mind because at the end of the day, my name is on the project. And I'm not going to put that name on the project unless I think that the creative is, to the quality of the company.
Yeah. I mean, it's someone needs to have a lead. There is always one producer who developed the project and the one who initiated the project, but later on you can really use some help, partnering with someone who is better in some other things than you are or has an access to some things that you don't have access to. Then when you are in a trouble, it's very beautiful to share problems with someone. Also when you win, it's very nice to share the win with someone. So this partnering, I know it complicates stuff, but it's also a huge benefit it can be a huge benefit for the project, because you can definitely learn from other people. But of course, then you set down either if you have a legal document to follow it, or you make it yourself, and then we agree on who has the final say in this case, or who has the final say in this case. So everything needs to be set up front, and then you only have a joy of co-producing. You don't have a headache. I think maybe for us from, I would say, low capacity audiovisual countries, it's a necessity. Therefore, we are much more used to that. But from this point, I would also like to have some set of rules that will differ the real co-productions from service productions and other different business models. Because I think the heart of co-production is really much more than getting more money and wider market.
I kind of want to interject, and I'll play devil's advocate here because it sounds so ideal, right? You look at the creative and you co-decide and you do these things. So my home country is a small country, Israel, which is, and there's no benefits, so we offer nothing other than creativity. I've worked on a co-production with France, and let me tell you, that was not fun because we were this much budget. They were shooting in Israel, but instead of shooting a series, in half the time, because it was French and it was a French director and French actors, it was double the time, and it cost, twice as much. And from that moment on, everything was different. Our pacing, the way we tell our stories, the amount of time we spend in editing, even the opening credits, everything was a struggle, and we were the smaller voice in the room, to the point where the show was finally ready and aired. We kind of, we didn't even promote it. Like, we didn't feel that was something that spoke to our audience. So, it sounds really nice when you kind of sit here on a panel and go, oh, everybody is in the room and we co-decide things. The reality is that there is a lead and there is a price to pay for whoever's taking the lead. But I think if I can take us back just a little bit, what do we talk about when we talk about co-production? Because, Emmanuel, most of the co-productions now are not really between broadcasters, unless there's a natural affinity like the alliance that you have between, Germany, France, and Italy, or the Nordic 12, or these natural, or what the EBU is trying to put together, hopefully in the future, with public broadcasters, where there's a shared and very distinct cultural reason to do that. Most of the co-production that we talk about is either done with streamers, and in that case, they're usually a second fiddle. In fact, the creative there is muted because they're a second window usually, and they'll help fund it, but as far as a creative partner, they're usually taking a back seat. But mostly, and I'm looking at you, Emmanuel, it's with distributors and financiers, and that's the real co-production today. When we talk about co-production, that's usually what we mean.
But that's I think the question. I think it's a question that I raised: is what is a co-production? I think if the co-production is with the distributor, and like ITV Studios it does the same, obviously, but then it's predominantly pre-sales and things like that, and isn't.
Oh, and my
And-
favorite phrase is acquisition,
Yeah.
which means an acquisition that masquerades like a commission.
And I'm not sure that I would deem that a co-production. That at least not as a producer, right? As a producer, I would say, well, that's financing. And however you then call the financing is a different thing. I think co-production, at least in my book, I mean, when I look at Arctic Circle or Freud, which I did, both of those were real co-productions. I had a real co-production partner with, on Arctic Circle, they were in the lead creatively, and Lagardère, they were in the lead creatively, but we made sure that the quality of the project that came out was to the standard of what we were selling into our market and what we were giving to Lagardère at the end of the day. And the same, for Freud, which was a very interesting co-production, because on the one hand it was Zatel and the ORF, and then we did have the streamer Netflix, but we also had ZDF. So we really put a lot of different players together and a sales entity, ZDF Studios. So again, it was a creative co-production. First and foremost, the reason was we needed the co-production in order to set it up and get the right budget together, but we came together through the creative and we made sure that that was working. I'm not saying that it's easy. I think you always struggle with who is the one that has the last say, and if you shoot in like in Finland when we did Arctic Circle, for sure I didn't want to blow the budget to a German budget, because then it wouldn't have made any sense. We wanted to produce it locally, plus 10% or 15% to make it special and extra good in that respect, but definitely not add 50% to make it to a German budget and then a normal German budget, and it wouldn't be extra good, So I think, the question is, what's a co-production?
But what is interesting, if I may, on the streamer side is now, but it's very, very new, the streamer, I'm talking about Netflix in particular, 2 years ago they wanted the whole world. So you have your show, local show, and then they bought it for the whole world. Now we can co-produce with them, and it becomes real co-production, meaning we can have a local show, in France, for example, and Netflix can co-produce it for France also, but we can have the worldwide, us as a distributor. So we can share the budget, we can share the artistic point of view, and they are more open, meaning more open on the artistic side, because they are not putting all the money anymore. So that can be very interesting in the future, in the very near future.
I mean, I have to say that's not near future, because what Kai Finke has been doing for the last, 10 years,
Yes, 10.
nearly, were exactly those kinds of co-productions, at least from the German market. He has been doing that.
In France, it's new.
And I know that, France has it, Italy has it now as well.
Yes.
So, I mean, Netflix has got those departments now, which do real co-production.
And it's really about reducing risk and also getting a local partner that knows that market and knows the creators and knows what it takes to produce well, and at a cost, hopefully a lower cost than when an American streamer comes into the market, and getting that authenticity plus access to some great content. Again, everybody's challenged now. Everybody's got less money. I mean, if we were sitting here this time last year, Netflix was worth, almost 4 times as what they're worth today. So that leads to necessity and more collaboration.
I think necessity is the absolute key word in what's sort of driving the two sides of this conversation. As I see it, there's the creative side and desire to tell the stories we want to tell, and then of course the harsh reality of the industry, which is we also need to make some money while doing so. But I think there's a really interesting point, perhaps to draw on a little bit more around choice of partners, because there's a conversation around the function of that relationship and what we're actually getting out of it, and then there's the who is the other person. We've mentioned the streamers very briefly on a couple of occasions so far. In the last time I did some deep research on this, which was about 5 years ago, we did a huge survey and tried to work out exactly the sort of the breadth of the role of various streamers in the creative process as well as the funding process. And it wasn't that deep. And it still seems to be the case that depending a little bit on your partner of streamers, of which we can roughly assume there are sort of 5 at the moment, the sort of interference in the creative process wasn't that much. So does that mean if you're thinking about preferred partners, streamers are the ideal ones? They've got the cash, they're bringing you the money, but they're not interfering with your creativity. Are streamers therefore the first person to go to?
It comes and goes. It depends, as Emmanuel was saying. I mean, it depends on, you know, what is the remit, what is the market like. They were very involved and then they weren't, and now they're not.
I think involvement also depends on what it is that you're getting, right? I mean, again, if you talk about the co-productions, Netflix co-productions department, as Dana said, what they want first and foremost is to make sure that there is a commissioning editor who knows the market and who knows that they will get the product to the quality that they have. Therefore, they are not interfering greatly. They will read and they will give notes to the most important things, but they will not be interfering too much. If you talk to the same company, but to the originals department, the originals department, then they will go down to the last, I don't know, nail that you are putting into your set and decide whether it's the right length. But that's, I think, you know, that is also a difference of how much money they put into the show and therefore how involved they need to be. And I think that's completely fair enough. It's what you sign up for.
I've got to say, I've done both. So I did a documentary series with a streamer as an original, and it's exactly that. I mean, the budget and the audit that we went to until we got that last 10% paid probably took 2 years. Just, you know, on the technical part of it, of getting everything approved. And I'm doing a co-production now with a streamer exactly in that model. And I have to say, it's actually quite nice because the feedback that we're getting comes from a whole lot of research and data. And it's been very interesting to see how that then applies into the content. So we're getting, you know, great things like, you know, if you don't have a big event within the first 4 minutes of the first episode, you know, 80% of people are going to continue and move on. I mean, these are really, really good points. You know, and I enjoy them, I've got to say, and I enjoy working with our creators and figuring out creative ways to use that knowledge and that data to bring it back to where a show needs to be. So you know, kind of.
In fact, in that sense, Netflix or the other streamer are becoming now like the linear, like any linear network, any broadcaster. We have some good broadcaster, or worst broadcaster, or less good broadcaster, and they are acting the same. So if they are giving the majority of the money, they want all of it. So that's, now we have the same different situation, but it's the same way of thinking. If they give all the money, they want all the decision, which is normal.
I mean, you were talking about the alliance. I think that again, you can easily do the same or apply the same for the public broadcasters because they have come to an agreement that there's only one voice because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. And depending on who the lead broadcaster is, that's the voice that you will hear as a producer or as a co-production. And you won't get notes from all the different you know, entities, which makes perfect sense. And that's the same as with the streamers. So I don't think you can say the streamers are better for co-productions than the public broadcasters. It just depends on, you know, who's your lead and you know, which door do you walk into?
That's the answer I was looking for. Outside of the sort of broadcasters and streamers, there are other options available. We mentioned sort of, you know, pure distributors right at the start. Sorry.
We have one.
Emmanuel, yeah, of course. Pure distributors right at the start.
Yes.
And we also talked a little bit away from this panel around sort of pure financing. Again, briefly, because I think we've done a lot with the streamers versus broadcasters conversation. What about distributors? And what about sort of pure financing deals? I mean,
Well, what we do as a distributor is really trying to, as you as a producer, is trying to find the best project. And when we have the best project, we try to finance it. So we can finance it, as you know, with an MG and doing a distribution deal like always. But now, it's because the market is very different, we need to find new solutions. And that's why we talk about co-production, co-financement, pre-sales, and everything. So that's the whole new model for a distributor. So we talk to the streamers, to the broadcaster, to everyone, in fact. And we try to make some match and try to find some solutions. But it's not only financial, it's mainly artistic at the beginning. And that's really something I want to emphasize, is that our job is many things, a lot of finance, a lot of money and everything, a lot of talks and everything, but at the end of the day, there's only one thing that matters, is a script. And that we are all looking for a good script. And when we find a good script, if we are a distributor or a producer or a broadcaster or a streamer, we will work on it and we will find some solution. We'll try to, at least.
So on the finances, and I have to ask this question, most sort of national bodies put enormous stock in the role of tax incentives to bring production into a particular country. But all the way through this panel, we've been talking about the primary in most cases being the creative, and then the finances being secondary. Even if that is perhaps an ideal situation. So therefore, do these tax incentives actually affect your kind of choices in that matter? Will it make you prioritize a whole project? Will it make you change part of the creative process in order to fit in with that country?
I mean, I would say it's part of whenever you start a project, one of the first things you do is you do a budget, right? And when you do the budget, you think about where can I shoot it and what tax incentives, breaks, shelters can I tap into. So then you have your net budget minus the tax incentives, and that is the budget that you need to raise. It doesn't really matter who I do a co-production with to determine which country I'm shooting it in, because the country I'm shooting it in is the country that will give me the most creative, meaning it looks the way that it needs to look, in the cheapest, meaning net of tax credits, budget region. And it might be a tax credit or it might be a low-cost country. It doesn't really matter. It's what is the net number at the end of the day. So for me, co-production has nothing to do with country to shoot in.
No.
Because I can do a co-production with Israel and shoot it in Turkey.
I was going to say in Croatia, but okay.
Yeah, okay.
No, don't come
Thank
here.
you. See, that's why you're on panels more than me.
We are
But if you think about the tax incentive, the tax rebates and everything before the project itself, it's not a real co-production. First, if you have a co-production between two countries, it's within two countries. Where you shoot, as you said, is totally different. We all know roughly all the tax credits and tax rebates in Europe, just talking about Europe, and so we know, okay, you want this kind of location, you can shoot there and there and there, or there is new tax rebates or new things in this country, so we can help, we can direct, but only for the shooting. If we are talking about co-production, we are talking about delegate producer. That means it's not about shooting, it's not about budget, not only about budget, it's about creativity, mainly.
And I think that, looking back at what the headline of this panel is, Arctic Circle is an example of exactly that working, meaning there was a production, they came to us, so it's a director who lives in Germany but is a Finn. There is reasons why it's a German-Finnish co-production, but we shot it there because we could do it there for a budget that we couldn't do it in Germany. And obviously it looks very local. It needed to be shot somewhere there, but it made most sense to shoot it there, and for a price point that we couldn't match anywhere else. But the reason for it to be a co-production was in order to get additional money above what the budget line was that they had initially discussed. It was how to finance that budget line, not where to shoot it.
Interesting.
And if I may, just one, because I think it's very important not to consider the small country in Europe, let's say Europe, like a servicing countries. Like it's not because we are going. If we want to do some co-production, we need to produce with them, talk with them, and share some common subject, common stories. It's not going there because there is some good tax rebates. It's not France going to I don't know what country because it's cheaper. It's because it's not co-production. It's servicing. It's because we share the same story, we have the same topic, and that's why we are going there. That's a real co-production. But everything is doable, but it's not the same term.
That's a good question. I'm going to pick up on that. Is that always a good thing, or is that forcing you to make compromises that maybe you didn't want to do in the first place? Of where your choice of partner. Let's say you're working on a particular project and you have a very clear creative sort of direction in mind, but because it's a co-production, you're being forced to make compromises. Is that a bad thing?
First of all, you're always compromising.
Yeah.
I mean, you're always making
absolutely part of
compromises
the
in
job.
any production, let alone a co-production. I mean,
I think
you're always
obviously
adjusting.
If your compromise is always the lowest common demeanor, then it's a problem. If it means that you're saying, oh, I want to do this better, how can we do it better? And the compromise is raising the quality. Compromise doesn't mean lowering the quality. It means asking the right questions, potentially.
It's more discussions than compromise. It's more, maybe it's tough discussion, it might be rough, but compromise, as you said, it's okay, what can we do on a lower grade? No, if we want to do one thing only, we write a book. As soon as we are doing some production, so we involve some partners, we need someone who will finance everything. So yes, we talk. So it's all about discussions. But compromise, no, that's really, yeah, of course we do some, but
I wanted to say that one shouldn't compromise only on choosing a partner. Everything else can be you can do compromising, and we do it all the time, but I think when picking up a co-production partner, that should really be rock solid marriage, not to compromise upfront. Maybe later on you need to compromise, but when choosing one, if it is not a broadcaster or distributor, I'm talking about company to company kind of partnership, then it should really be very well thought of and without compromising. And then you do the compromises together with your partner. That would be ideal situation.
I do want to use, if that's okay, the last kind of 5 minutes, because you promised you were going to get hopefully some takeaways for people. And we talk up, we've all had that experience and we've all been around this market for a long time, but I think co-production in this particular market is quite new. And local production that's exportable for this market is relatively new. And if anybody has tips on how to even start co-producing and how do you meet these partners and how do you meet a distributor and what kind of projects to take out into the market and, tips, actual takeaways that we could all give.
Well, I mean, for me again, for me it's easiest to reference something I've done, and Arctic Circle is one of those because it was a small production country trying to expose something to the world, a bigger audience, basically. And I think that what is key is that the story that they were intending to tell was very local, and at the same time something that was universal enough and spoke to us, meaning Germany, enough for it to make sense to do it as a co-production, because we were very sure that we would find a home for it in Germany. And I think that is obviously one of the best ways of doing a co-production, is when you can tell a story locally and find a bigger partner who can still make it a commission rather than an acquisition. That's the ideal world. It doesn't happen very often, but I do think it does happen. I think those are the co-productions that one should strive for. The other ones where it's more about just financial gain, probably it's easier to go with a distributor or someone who is specialized in raising financing rather than specialized in producing.
And also has those connections and knows, who's in the pre-buy market, who is relevant for, what kind of windowing.
That's what we do.
Exactly. No, I'm saying
That's where I can act.
that's where you can. I'll tell you what I don't recommend anybody do is think they have a co-production, and because it's universal and it's right for any country, that is the worst thing you can possibly do. I get calls every single day from people saying, oh, this is a big co-production because it takes place in multiple countries and it has characters from different, speaking different languages. Absolutely don't do that. Don't write for a co-production. Write for your market, write where you know. And then exactly like Moritz said, I think, work on amplifying that with a natural co-production.
Sorry, just what is very important in co-production is like for a love story, you need to find a good partner. And that seems stupid to say that, but it's really, talking about Media One, for example, we have something like 25 or 30 production company. So when I'm talking about co-production, I say, okay, maybe you can match with this one or this one, but not or less with this one. It's like a couple. And like in a couple, 2 is a good number. After 3 is more difficult. And 4 is impossible. But 2 for co-production is okay. But when you have 3, it's always difficult to make some notes, to do all this stuff and comments and compromise.
I think as a takeaway, maybe as a thought, that we should discuss it more at the market such as this one is, and we should act via professional industry organizations trying to come up with some set of rules with some common ground and find some legal framework within. It would be easier to work and not to be exploited by a bigger guy or, things like that. To put down the set of rules, who has which rights and who is in the lead and what is a real co-productions. I'm talking about the framework that we already have in the film industry, so it wouldn't be that difficult to adapt, and then it would be easier for everyone, I think.
Well, this is perfect timing. Thanks so much. We have 10 seconds left, so I'll do a very quick summary, and you've already done your own key takeaways. So co-production, it's about compromise, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the story is compromised. It's about choosing the right partner, and increasingly it seems that the partner of choice is broad and allows the same stories to be told. It's about fitting to the project and not the other way around. And of course, and really interestingly, it's more about the way the funding funds the project than creating the project from the funding, if that makes sense. So thank you very much for attending this opening panel of Nem Zagreb, and a round of applause for my panel.